Members, we now move to debate on the clauses 1 and 2, and the question is that clause 1 stand part. I call Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I think that talking to the title of this bill is something that we do need to spend a bit of time on. Because, Mr Chairman, I would like to have thought that the Labour Party would and could support any piece of legislation that came before this House called the Environmental Reporting Bill, given that New Zealand is the only country, one of the only countries in the OECD not to have this regime of environmental reporting in play. We're having some calls from the opposition benches, so vote for it. Well, Mr Chairman, we would dearly like to have been able to vote for this, and we would have voted for this legislation if it had been true independent environmental reporting. In fact, we put it to the government, both at Select Committee and we put it in the committee stages in this House, that we would indeed vote for this legislation if the government would agree to the amendments to Clause 18, if we would make the changes that meant that we did have independent environmental reporting in this country. Then this isn't any slur on any particular minister, because it is strongly our belief that ministers of whichever side of the House, ministers will only ever come from one side of the House, I guess, but ministers from whichever party in this House need to have legislative constraints within our legislation to ensure independence. We do not want to be legislating and allowing the potential for political interference. So, Mr Chairman, rather than the Environmental Reporting Bill, I think this bill is should more rightly be called the Opportunity Lost Bill. Because, Mr Chairman, this is a huge opportunity lost. That New Zealand, it is a good thing that New Zealand did turn its attention to putting in place an environmental reporting regime. But, Mr Chairman, we did lose the opportunity to do this properly. That we haven't done this in a way that is going to ensure that we have a robust and independent reporting regime in place that is going to report on the state of the environment, that is going to allow for better environmental outcomes. And for that reason, to us, it is a huge opportunity lost. I've been sitting in the House throughout I think all of the committee stages of this bill, and have heard some contributions, some of them more thoughtful than others. But one that I thought this afternoon that was a thoughtful contribution from the other side of the House was that of Todd Mueller, who sits on the Local Government and Environment Select Committee. And he, in response to the opportunity that my colleague Sua Williams-Seo put up in terms of New Zealand taking leadership in this region, in terms of considering how what we do not only impacts on our environment but our broader regional environment as well. And Sua and my colleague Chris Farfoy have made compelling cases around what the impact is on the Pacific. And Todd Mueller said that perhaps this is something that we could consider later on in terms of synthesis reports, that this is something that we could delay. Mr Chairman, here is another example of how this is an opportunity lost. We cannot be delaying in considering the impacts of what New Zealand does in New Zealand on the broader environment of the region and what the impacts are for our Pacific neighbours. We don't have time actually to think we'll put this off manana, we'll put this off to another day. This is something that we have to confront now. This is something that we do need to take a leadership position on, and this is something that we can't simply say we'll look at that in the future. And then we had some quite extraordinary contributions of this. My colleague Ruth Dyson has touched on one where the contribution from Mr Foster Bell, where he made some extraordinary comments around what the impact of what New Zealand does on its environment and what its impact regionally would be. So once again, Mr Chairman, we see examples of opportunities that are lost and how we did have the opportunity to do something much better. We also could suggest another name for this, and it could be the Not Independent Environmental Reporting Bill. And that is a topic that has been canvassed at length at various stages, at the committee stage and in the earlier stages in this debate. That it is Clause 18, where we sought those amendments around that, where we could have fixed this legislation. We could have made this a piece of legislation, I believe, that did have support across this House. That we could could have come to a consensus around what good, independent, robust environmental reporting looked like, and we could have had all parties, Mr Chairman.
Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Just before we do, you have the call. The question before us is a clauses 1 and 2 stand part, and that's title and commencement. So I'm making that point. It's not just the titles, it's title and commencement. Dr Megan Woods.
That's right, Mr Chairman. The commencement is something I'm planning on addressing in subsequent calls on this piece of legislation. I know everyone will be eagerly anticipating it. But, Mr Chairman, I think that the title of this bill does deserve our consideration. Because, as I was saying, this is the not independent, that we have canvassed that, and we have also indicated how this is a bill that could have had cross-party support, how we could have got there with actually, I think, some substantial but not huge tweaks. But unfortunately, we have had a government that hasn't been willing to listen to this, that didn't listen to the petitioners who came to Select Committee and made their very good submissions. And we're talking about some people that think long and hard about these issues. We're talking about the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. We're talking about the Resource Management Law Society. We're talking about substantial bodies that pointed out. We're talking about the Environment Defence Society, Fish and Game, Forest and Bird, substantial bodies in New Zealand that give a great deal of thought to these matters, who came to us and said, please make sure that this is truly independent environmental reporting, because the bill you have in front of you and the bill we are now about to pass its committee stages is not independent environmental reporting. But, Mr Chairman, it saddened me that government members refused to listen to that government members at every stage of this legislation have not listened to very good advice about how we could have had a much better piece of legislation, and a piece of legislation which I think would have been wonderful to have all parties in this House able to support it, to be able to have all parties in the New Zealand Parliament be able to say, I think it is a good thing that we put in place a robust environmental reporting regime like the rest of the OECD, and that we join the ranks of those countries that do that. But instead, what we have here is a dim piece of legislation. It is a dimmer version of what it could have been. When National first came to power, they offered us the brighter future. Well, here's the dimmer future in this piece of legislation. This is a shadow of what we could have had. This is not a brighter future. This certainly is not living up to that. And the minister in charge of this legislation, Nick Smith, has been in charge of a lot of things that aren't really living up to the brighter future. So, Mr Chairman, we could perhaps rename this the Nick Smith Blunder number 323 bill. That could be another name, and the number keeps rising, so unless we pass this quickly, we'll probably be looking at number 512 in only a few days. Because, Mr Chairman, what we're seeing is a minister shepherding this through who should have been listening to the submission, to the very sage submissions. It was started by Minister Amy Adams, who introduced it, and then finished off by her successor, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith, that should have listened to those submissions, should have listened to what these substantial bodies were saying and what their advice was, but that was not something that he was willing to listen to. And, Mr Chairman, maybe that's because he's quite preoccupied in other portfolios, that we do see that particular minister having to put out fires in other portfolios that he has. And that's why I suggested that title. That title, Mr Chairman, that's something that I suggested, and that is the reason for that. So, Mr Chairman, it saddens me that we're in this House debating the Environmental Reporting Bill, a bill that is called the Environmental Reporting Bill, when it's not everything that it could be, when it hasn't lived up to that name, when really we still have the opportunity for it to become a political instrument of this government or any government. Whoever is in power, this legislation allows environmental environmental reporting to become a political instrument, that you have the minister being both poacher and gamekeeper. And Mr Chairman, that is something I think we should avoid in any legislation that we pass in this House. It should just be part of good practice that we're setting up robust processes so that we do separate out those functions and that we do have someone else making the decisions for solely environmental reasons. And if we look at the title, the Environmental Reporting Bill, that should be the primary and driving force around what we choose to report on, not what serves the government of the day, whoever that government may be, and what they wish to report on. So, Mr Chairman, the Environmental Reporting Bill is not living up to its name. It's not going to adequately report on the environment.
I'm going to call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.